The time to build is upon us.
With great power comes great responsibility.
You know the greatest danger facing us is ourselves. A rational fear of the unknown.
Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
This is the Superhuman Academy podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad to doing.
Yeah, I'm glad to reconnect with you as well, Collin.
How have you been doing since we last spoke?
Actually, pretty amazing. I was proud of myself. I did a super good jog and a strong workout. I have this book, Multiverse Mayhem, coming out August the 8th. So it's the third book in the fantasy trilogy. And it just won another award. It won a Reader's Choice Award. So that made me happy.
Yeah, that's exciting. What was it called? Something Mayhem? Multiverse Mayhem?
The third book is called Multiverse Mayhem. It comes out August the 8th. This is the proof copy. That's why it's got that gray bar
got
on
it.
it.
What's the series called?
And the series is called Magic, Mystery, and the Multiverse.
Oh,
And it
boy.
won the Reader's Choice Award, Best Book for Teens, and several other awards. So you can
That's
see.
amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
So that's kind of cool. And then I'm helping my clients with their books. So that's always fun.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
What inspired you to get into writing teen fantasy novels?
Well, my life was changed at age 9 when I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. And I remember reaching up to get the last book in that series, which is called The Last Battle. And as my fingers touched the spine, I just had this chill. And it was like anticipatory grief because it was the last book in the series, but also, I got one more book to read. And in that moment, I realized that authors are wizards. Through just words on a page, we can transport someone to another place in time, and that we can make a difference to people even after we're dead. C.S. Lewis mentored me actually twice, and he changed my life even after he was dead. And I realized by reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that if I can inspire or encourage youth to love reading, and if I can, as C.S. Lewis did, hide some deeper, more meaningful spiritual themes in a fun, fast-paced fantasy, then that's a meaningful legacy.
Yeah, I remember that book. I grew up in a conservative Christian environment, and so C.S. Lewis was a popular option. I remember watching the old Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, like VHS tapes, and I remember like the I don't know if did you ever see those?
I can't say that I did. I've
Oh,
watched
okay.
something more recent probably, but
Yeah.
yeah, we're dating ourselves with the VHS.
Yeah,
I remember those.
the Beaver family was like just people dressed in beaver costumes. It was great. Uh, but The Last Battle, I remember that one in particular. There was the soldier that was on the wrong side or whatever the whole time, but was switched. That stuck with me. I don't remember a ton from those books, but that was one thing that stuck with me, just that idea of, um, how your heart can be aligned and oriented in one way, even if you are in a context that doesn't support that, and just that idea has kinda stuck with me throughout my life of seeing people outside of their context and how the group or environment that somebody might be enmeshed in does not define them.
Yeah. One of the things I'm most proud of with this fantasy series, Magic, Mystery, and the Multiverse, is something along that line. I feel like one of the characters that I put in a very tough spot because his mother's on the bad side and his father's on the good side, and he didn't even realize, until surprise, guess who your father is? So he's very torn, and at the beginning, he does some things because he's being loyal to his mother that later he realizes were bad. And so one of the scenes that stood out to me from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is, the character of Lucy, and then her brother, I believe his name is it Edmund,
It's one of them, yeah.
who's being troublesome and telling everybody that she's lying when she says she's going to Narnia.
Mhm.
And then there's the scene with Aslan, the lion, sacrificing himself in lieu of Edmund, because the queen says, "He's bad. I have a claim on his life." And Aslan says, "Well, actually, there's old magic, and I will sacrifice myself to save the boy." And then he dies. And then, of course, uh, the stone cracks and there's older magic and the mice rescue Aslan. So I feel that in a completely different way, and that's fresh, that's fun, I created a really meaningful scene around forgiveness with
Mhm,
with the sacrifice.
mhm. Well, I don't know if I will read the teen fantasy novels, but I am intrigued by people who write them because I found that when I make my small attempts at writing creatively, especially in fiction, I have trouble with not writing the same story over and over again, and with my basically everything I write just turns into, writing philosophy and losing the story element and just turning into writing my thoughts, and it turns into journaling. So I'm always fascinated with people. I mean, you mentioned it, like, people who write, and they're kind of wizards, and the ability to put your to create multiple characters and hold the tension at once. So, bravo to you. That's interesting.
Well, I'm one of those rare people who help people write books who helps people both with fiction and nonfiction. That's pretty
Mhm,
unusual, and also have a background in film and television, so that's pretty unusual. And also, I've launched several successful businesses, so that sets me apart amongst people who like to help other people create books. But I want to share that C.S. Lewis changed my life a second time after he died when I read his book, A Grief Observed. And
mm,
I read that book just after my husband died suddenly. He was 33. I was 31 at the time, and our son was 4. And I read various self help books, how to overcome grief. But what I loved about C.S. Lewis's book, which was initially published under a pseudonym and then later became the movie Shadowlands with Deborah Winger and Anthony Hopkins, I just loved how raw and real it was. And it helped me feel like I wasn't alone,
mhm,
that what I was going through with grief, which was the most intense experience I'd ever had, didn't mean that I was broken or that I was even abnormal, but that grief is so extreme, as you know.
mhm,
And I was very much comforted by his book, A Grief Observed. And actually, it was the reason why I published my diary of healing, which is called From Heartbreak to Happiness, and also published later a couple other books about happiness, including the one that I mailed to you, Grief Relief in 30 Minutes.
mhm. Yeah.
Um, because, well, with the fantasy books, I think it's super valuable if I can encourage people to love reading and that can change their life. But then people who are dealing with grief, it's so heavy and you can get stuck in grief for so long. So I thought anything I can do to help other people who are struggling with grief to know they're not alone, to know that there can be a path out, and to provide this journaling process, the peace method that I used it yesterday. I still use it
Mhm.
because life is difficult.
Yeah. This is what I wanted to talk with you about, and I specifically wanted to ask about, how to communicate and relate to people who are experiencing intense grief effectively. I I've noticed in my interactions recently that people tend to be pretty awkward and uncomfortable around grieving people,
Yes.
and they don't know what to do or what to say. They just kinda, shuffle and stand there and, like, I received a lot of I saw certain patterns that just kept kind of coming up, and,
Yeah.
I don't mind any of these. I really appreciated people for expressing whatever they could in whatever way they could, but I noticed, um, there was one pattern which I might call, like, bright siding, which would be trying to find positive aspects. Um, some people would relay their own experience and just share what kind of losses and grief they'd experienced in their life. Some people would just stand there and say nothing, and I'm just curious based on your experience and what you've learned and it seems like you've spent a lot of time thinking about this and helping people with it. What have you found to be the most effective ways to communicate and support and help people in their healing journey as they grieve?
Yeah, I think, I put a list of worst and best things to say in the book I sent you, Grief Relief in 30 Minutes. What I find is most people are not very good listeners and they don't understand that grief is going to affect everybody. So it's just not something they've got practice with. So what I recommend is don't try to solve the problem. Don't try to compare with your loss. It's not like my owie's bigger than your owie. Just be real and be present. So one of the most useful things to say is when somebody says, "Hey, my husband died, or my child died, or I just got through a divorce, or I just went bankrupt, or I just got cancer," any kind of devastating news, take a moment and just breathe and take in that news and check with your body and your heart. Like, just take a moment. It's something profound that's just been shared. You don't have to trivialize, you don't have to solve. In fact, it's better to just take a moment and then you can say whatever's authentic, but it could just be, "I don't know what to say.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing. I'm on your support team." Just take a moment. Let the other person who's struggling with grief, who's been willing to be open with you, have a moment to share more if they want to. So
Mhm.
you don't want to make them feel interrogated or cross-examined. Um, you can say something like, "Wow, that really hit me in my heart," or "I wasn't expecting to hear you say that. I can't imagine what you're going through." It's better to say, "I can't imagine what you're going through," because it's an invitation for them to share, but it's not an interrogation. It's not
Mhm.
like, "Tell me what you're going through." It's just like, "I can't imagine what you're going through." Even if you think you can imagine, you it's more respectful to say you can't imagine because, as you know, Colin, even the same person with the same grief on one day can go through a bunch of different feelings, and one
Yeah.
moment may be actually filled with gratitude, and another moment devastated by sorrow, and another moment overwhelmed with guilt, and another moment anticipating or thinking about all the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and another moment just like mourning all the hopes and dreams that are no longer going to happen.
Mhm.
So it's better to just say, "I don't know what to say. I can't imagine what you're going through." Even just take a breath, touch your heart, and go, "Wow." And it's better not to, unless you're talking for an hour, it's really better not to talk about if the person says they've got cancer, don't tell them the story about your mother who just died from cancer or your friend. Like, it's not helpful because
Mhm.
you want to be a compassionate friend. You want to be a listener. You don't want to shift the table so that the grieving person has to comfort or console you. Honestly,
Yeah.
my experience, I want to hear what you'd like to share about this, but my experience when I was grieving is like 40% of me was in the past with regret and despair, and grief is really all about the past. And, 40% of me was in the future with all the hopes and dreams that weren't gonna happen now, which only left 20% of me available right here, right now. So grieving people are, not really available to comfort you with your loss. If it's fresh, you'll know if they are. And they also need to be careful about simple everyday things like chopping vegetables, driving a car, because their, heart is full.
Mhm. Yeah, I observed that a lot, which, specifically when people were uncomfortable with the scenario and specifically like, "Oh, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do." And this is just a normal human tendency is to seek comfort. And so if someone's uncomfortable and they start to seek comfort, and who are they gonna seek comfort from? Well, it's potentially the person who's grieving who they came to
Yeah.
comfort. And then it ends up, like you said, kind of flipping the tables. And so I wanted to hone in on something you said, which I found to be true to my experience, which is that it wasn't so much what people said. Um, what they said didn't matter so much as whether they were able to allow themselves to be present to the experience. What you talked about of taking a breath and feeling it and letting it hit you, and um, that is I think it's a skill. It's hard to do, and many people are closed off to that discomfort or that pain. They don't really want to experience that, which is understandable. But yeah, I found it really helpful. The people who I felt most comforted by were the people who, when they heard it, I could just see that they were allowing themselves to experience what they're experiencing in that moment. Whatever it was just like, "Oh, okay, this person is present to this." They're not
Yeah.
immediately disassociating, they're not trying to get away from it, they're not trying to fix my problem, they're just experiencing their own experience, and you can see it in their body language of, like, they're feeling something right now, and they are willing to be vulnerable enough to show that. They're
Yeah.
willing to wear that so that I can see that too, and that allowed me to connect with them more authentically than what I perceived as another tendency was, I think, probably in a desire to not put things on me, people kind of putting up a little bit of a wall or, like, wearing a mask, like, "Well, I don't want you to have to bear my grief, you're going through a lot, so I'm just gonna kind of put on my own mask and seem fine," and I didn't find that to be particularly helpful. It
Mhm.
was like, "No, just, like, just be here, just be fully present, because that helps me to be fully present and connect with you in this moment,
Yeah.
rather than, like, what you said, being all over the future or all over the past, just be present with my own emotions."
Yeah, so really the first step, for the person who's hearing is to acknowledge without fixing. So acknowledge what the other person said. It can be as simple as, "Wow, that hit me." That's an acknowledgement. You don't
Mhm.
have to mirror back their exact words. And then the
Yeah.
second step, as you're talking about, is to be present. Most people have no clue that being present, listening without fixing, is actually the biggest gift they can give another person. Because when you're willing to just be grounded for the both of you, take a deep breath, invite, if it's your belief in your belief system, invite in spirit. If it's in your practice, imagine rooting to Mother Earth so that you're grounded for listening, and then or do whatever works for you to be present, and then just listen without fixing and hear what they're willing to share. You don't have to really say much. Usually, grieving people, if you are willing to listen and it's a good moment for them, they're quite eager to share, because as you listen without fixing, you help them sort it out. Like, I would guess that your experience might be similar to mine, but let me just speak for myself. Like, when I was grieving, because my husband died suddenly at the age of 33, and he died right in front of me, so I had PTSD a little bit, I think, or a lot. All these tangled thoughts about the past and the future, and was it my fault, and was I a good enough mom, and how was I going to manage to be a single mom, and how was I going to pay the rent, and it was like just a nightmare in there. But
Mhm.
when somebody was willing to listen without fixing, for example, my brother Bryce, he was very good at just being present. And sometimes he would put a hand on me, but often just he would just sit there, and because he wasn't racing off, I would unburden myself. And when you're speaking to somebody else, you have to say one thought at a time. And so even if the other person doesn't say a thing, it helps you sort it out. It helps the grieving person acknowledge their loss, acknowledge their feelings, which grief is not one feeling. Grief is a cacophony of feelings. Grief is not just sorrow. It's much more chaotic than that, much more
Mhm.
intermingled than that. So it's helpful for somebody to be there and listen while the grieving person expresses their sorrow, their loss, their anger, their fear, their guilt, their self recrimination, their anger at God, whatever it might be, their anger at the doctor, their anger at whatever, their fear about the future, the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. It's what I learned because I coached and listened to many grieving people is that most grieving people feel like nobody else goes through this. Nobody else blames themselves for their child's death or their husband's death or their divorce or their getting fired. Or, you know what? I found out everybody does. It's just part of how the brain works. It's easier, oddly. You'll let me know if this resonates with you, but most people find that the way the brain works, it's easier to crucify yourself and blame yourself for some very far fetched reason, but grief is not logical, than to deal with the chaos of the universe. the brain doesn't like the idea that random stuff happens.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so the brain prefers to crucify the grieving person. The grieving person does this to themselves. Think, okay,
Yeah.
it shoulda, coulda, woulda. If only X, then Y wouldn't have happened. Um, and it's not necessary for the listener to make that person wrong or bad or to agree or disagree. Just listen. And then if you have a close relationship with them and you have coaching skills, or maybe you've read the book Grief Relief in 30 Minutes and you've got that 5-step peace method, then you could give them the book and they can do it as a journaling process. Or I always make it very clear when I'm listening or when I'm coaching somebody. And in fact, we could even do a sample coaching here if you want. I would say something like, um, would you be interested in doing a 5-step coaching process with me to see if we can get some relief for you? And they would say, no, I just want you to listen, or no, I have to go pick up the kid. Or they could say, sure, what does that look like? And then I'll say, okay. And then walk them through it. What I
Mhm.
found is that, um, well, let me just say the broad strokes. I went to grief support groups at church. I went to see therapists. I talked to friends until they ran out of patience. I tried many things to get through grief, but I just found for myself and the people that I help that some form of cognitive behavioral therapy is the most helpful. And you do it gently, you do it kindly. The peace method is simply 5 different questions, and it allows the rumination to be interrupted by a question, and then it allows the person to look at whatever's bothering them in that moment from different points of view. And I've usually found that people will get an aha or an insight or relief within about 15 minutes. I call the book Grief Relief in 30 Minutes because I think if you're in the throes of grieving, it's good to set aside a half an hour every day to do a little meditation, do a little journaling, and do the peace method. And you can easily do that in 15 minutes, but say half an hour is generous.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, one thing that you said, I found this to be true, not just with grief, but coaching and being a good friend in general, of trusting people to solve their own problems, and rather than attempting to solve, fostering or cultivating a space in which they can do that. So,
Yeah,
one thing that you said about listening well and even asking questions, the purpose of that is not so that you, as the listener, can understand the other person's problem or figure out a solution or solutions. It's simply to invite that person to do that for themselves and allow them to feel safe in that context to do that. And many people struggle to process internally. And
yeah,
so inviting them to process externally, where it's a little easier, they can hear their own words. And
yeah,
yeah, I found that with coaching too. When I first started coaching, I definitely had a tendency to want to jump in with advice and solutions and have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? And the longer I've done it, the less I suggest anything. And it's simply a matter of, all right, I'm going to practice regulating myself as much as possible and be as present as possible and as open and curious. And the purpose of that is just to create the environment in which they feel safe to solve their own problems. And if they come up with solutions that make no sense to me, that is totally okay. It doesn't matter. 'Cause it doesn't need to make sense to me.
exactly. Well, it's interesting, like, I've coached people through the peace method thousands of times, and sometimes as a coach and I've trained people how to do it, but sometimes as a coach, it requires you to let go of you don't know the answer that they're going to say.
Mhm,
Just, and to trust the simple process, to trust asking an open-ended question is hard for some people. And if you can ask an open-ended question and then wait, the person will discover what their answer is, and that's the most value for them. In fact, when we give somebody else an answer, their brain doesn't change. But when they come up with the answer after thinking about it, it actually zzz, it
mhm,
rewires their brain. It creates myelin. It creates an eureka moment or an aha moment, and that rewiring is what then gives them the gift of being able to do something differently.
Mhm. Alright, and you generously offered a coaching session right here, and I will never turn those down because it's an
All right,
opportunity for
let's
me
do
to
it.
learn, so let's do this. Where do we start?
All right. So I'm going to walk you through the peace method, which is basically 5 questions. There may be sub questions.
Okay.
What I find works best is for us to, I'll give you a minute in a minute to share a few things that are in your heart that are heavy right now. So it works best to work on something real. We might as well work on the
Yeah,
heaviest
of
thing that
course.
you're willing to share. And then what works best is follow the 5 steps all the way through to the end. What may happen is that you'll notice another thought that's upsetting you. Maybe it's upsetting you more, but let's not get chaotic. Let's agree to follow the process through with whatever thought we start with, and then you'll get the benefit. And then you can also work the other thoughts as a journaling process later. Does that sound good?
Yes. Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so let's take a minute to just tell me what's heavy in your heart right now. What's causing grief, fear, upset, anxiety?
Alright, right now I'm scanning my body a little bit, seeing if I feel weight anywhere. I'm not having anything come up that's super strong in this moment,
Okay. Well,
so
it will work best to work on a thought, and it doesn't have to be super strong.
Mhm.
We can work on something
Yeah.
light.
Yep.
It could be as simple as I made a mistake. It's my
Mhm.
fault. Um, was it a boy
Yeah.
or a girl who died?
Leander, he's a boy.
So he shouldn't have died. He was taken too soon. God made a mistake. Um, we'll
Yeah,
never have another child. Like anything like that.
none of those resonate with me in this moment, but, um, there is might take me a second to put
Yeah,
words
take your time.
to this. Most of my heaviness or experience of grief right now is more for, Jess, my wife, and the the shared desires and visions for the future that are no longer possible in the way that we imagined them.
Mm. All right, let's talk a little bit more and see if we can break it down to one simple sentence.
Okay.
Like I usually spend, 5 minutes doing this part. And
Yeah.
usually I don't have to ask because usually people show up on a coaching call with blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. I do a lot of work already, so thankfully, I've
So
processed through a lot already.
it could sound something like Jess is suffering. Uh, Jess is unhappy, or our hopes and dreams for the future will never happen. Like just one simple sentence, but that's true for you, that captures something that's
Yeah,
heavy.
right. Mm. Maybe this is probably more true to the core, which is that Elias will not have Leander as a brother, or a living brother at least.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's a good one. The kinda cool thing about the peace method is it doesn't really matter where you start, as long as you start sincerely, because I feel like, grief or stress, anything like that, it's like a prison that we're inside, and the prison is made of bricks, and each brick is one of these kind of thoughts. Like, Elias will not have Leander as a living brother. Um, but if you're in a prison, you don't actually have to take down all of the bricks. You just have to loosen or pop out a few, and then you can slide out to freedom. So I think our painful thoughts
Mhm.
are similar that way. All right, can you find anything that's more heavy at this moment than Elias won't have Leander as a brother?
I will check. No, that's what's most resonant and heavy for me right now.
And how old is Elias?
Turns 3 in a few days.
Oh, all right. And what is your belief system now? A spiritual belief system, because what I'm gonna do next is make a safe container, so I wanna be sure not to use words that are, not safe for you.
No, there's no words that are not safe for me.
Okay, very good. So I'm just gonna lead us in a little, a meditation to set the energy, make it a sanctuary, make it safe, invite in spirit, and so that we're both noticing this is not just a normal chit chat, we're doing something different. And then I'll walk you through the peace method, the first step of which is to become present. So that's how we become present. Does that work for you?
It works.
All right. So inhale and relax your body. Exhale and smile. Inhale, coming fully into the present moment. And release. And again, inhale and come fully into your body and release anything troubling you. Now, your job, Colin, is to keep with a deep breathing, and I'll just say a few words. So I honor and acknowledge that the divine is. It is thy I am that I am. It is the peace that surpasses all understanding. It is all needs met. I honor and acknowledge that the divine is in everything and in everyone, including in me and including in Colin. So I invite that part of us that is divine, or that part of us that's a channel or instrument for the divine, to be fully present right here and right now. And I uplift Colin and his family and acknowledge what they're experiencing right now and call forth the divine spirit to guide us in this moment, to give him greater peace of mind and peace of heart. And I release this intention with gratitude and with thanksgiving, knowing that it was already done even before I spoke. So be it. And so it is. So then the first step is this thought: Elias will not have Leander as a brother. Is that thought mostly in the past, present, or future? Of those three, you can give me a percentage, or you can say it's all in the future, whatever you notice.
That version of that thought is future.
Okay. So already good to notice, because the future can terrorize us, but it's not right here,
Mhm.
right now. So the next step of the peace method is just to express the thoughts and feelings that come up. You started doing this already. So let's
Mhm.
start with when you believe the thought that Elias will not have Leander as a brother, where does it land in your body? What is the physical sensation that happens when you believe that thought?
I feel a catch in my throat. I
Hmm.
feel, a tightness in my chest. I feel, um my eyes feel twitchy. I feel hot. My left hand feels a little tingly. Those are the main experiences.
Great. Thank you for sharing. That's a lot of um, observation. So, when you believe the thought, Elias will not have Leander as a brother, do you notice any other reactions, any other thoughts or feelings? We've looked at your physical sensations, but what other thoughts or feelings come up?
I imagine them riding bikes together.
Mm.
Yeah. That's the main thought.
Okay, thanks for sharing. And do you notice any way that you may treat Elias differently with this thought?
I feel a desire or compulsion to fill that gap.
Mm. Is it a desire or do you also act on that?
Yeah, I do act on that to some degree. I I attempt to play games in a way that feels more brotherly.
Mm. Oh, thanks for sharing. And do you notice that you treat yourself differently with the thought Elias will not have Leander as a brother?
I don't know. I feel disappointment, but also grace. Yeah, I feel mostly grace towards myself.
Okay. Any other reactions that you're present to when you believe the thought Elias won't have Leander as a brother? Do you notice you treat Jess differently? Do you notice any other thoughts or reactions that you'd care to share?
I feel more nurturing and gentle in response to the thought.
Hmm.
Yeah, the desire to hug myself, Jess, Elias. That's the it's the action that it pushes me towards.
All right, good to notice. Are you ready to move on to the next step?
Yes.
Okay, so now I'm going to invite you to do something paradoxical, and I'll just also do a little mini meditation to go with it. What I'm going to invite you to do, the A of the peace method stands for allow, or maybe we'll even get to appreciate. Who knows? Could happen. Miracles happen. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes if you're willing and just take a deep breath. And just imagine that you're sitting on a park bench. It's a beautiful sunny day, not too hot. There's trees nearby, there's a little whisper of wind making the leaves shimmer. And you're watching children play in the playground. You've got a book you're reading, partly reading, and you're glancing up to see little Collin. And you're looking at yourself. Maybe you're about 6 years old, maybe 5 or 4. You can choose whatever age feels right. Maybe even 3, because that's the age that Elias is, and that's familiar age for you. And little Collin is having a great time, actually. And he's saying, "Look, Daddy, look, Daddy." He's going up the slide. And he gets to the top of the slide. He makes sure you're watching. Look, Daddy, look, Daddy. And then he slides down the slide, but it gets going a little bit too fast. And he hits the bottom with a big whump and skins his knee. So little Collin comes running to big Collin, who's sitting on the park bench. And he's really upset and he's crying. And he's saying, Elias won't have Leander as a brother. Elias won't have Leander as a brother. He's devastated. He's really upset. You don't make him wrong. You don't make him right. You just welcome him on your lap. You allow the thought, Elias won't have Leander as a brother. And you become the nurturing friend, the nurturing adult, witnessing his upset and allowing it. You don't make the thought wrong or right. You don't make little Collin wrong or right. You simply hold that space of grace, of kindness, of nurturing energy. And you allow little Collin to sob on your lap. And you welcome him. You cherish him. You're there for him. You've got his back. And as you listen to him crying, saying, Elias won't have Leander as a brother, he feels heard, he feels loved, he feels safe, he feels cherished, and gradually he melts into you, into your hug. And gradually his sobs ease because you've witnessed and allowed what's going on with him. He's only a little kid, so he takes a big breath. And his tears are over like a thunderstorm. And he wiggles around, gives you a hug, whispers a secret in your ear, and he just goes off to play. So take a couple of deep cleansing breaths and notice how you feel, how your body feels. Notice any thoughts. And when you're ready, open your eyes and share whatever you'd like to.
Yeah, there was a release and um, some closure, especially in the moments when he shared him stop crying and kind of move on. I've seen Elias do that before, where the world is ending, and then suddenly he's on to play with the next toy as if nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
I had some trouble imagining myself as a 3-year-old. I haven't seen that many pictures of myself at that age, at least not in a long time. So my brain was having trouble conjuring that image, but eventually I think I got at least kind of age close. I was probably more around 5 or 6. But, uh,
That's fine, whatever age you chose.
yeah, it was interesting, though, to realize that how difficult it was for me to imagine myself at that age. I've thought of myself at that age so rarely.
Hmm.
Um, and I have very few memories that I actually access from when I was very young.
Interesting to notice. So possibly this weight that you're carrying for your 3-year-old son, Elias, is the thought of someone older.
Yeah, I don't know. That that did there was a release and a shift there, so I appreciate that.
Yeah. Let's see. And there's no wrong or right, but let's just see what could you possibly appreciate about the thought Elias won't have Leander as a brother?
I can appreciate the truth of it.
Hmm.
Can appreciate that it's something that can be stated and that I have those words and that I'm not afraid of those words. It's clear.
Hmm. Ready to move on to the next step?
Yep.
All right. So the next step is to consider the contrary. So we want to add or subtract one word. So Elias will not have Leander as a brother. Could be Elias will have Leander as a brother, as one example of a contrary. Is there any way you can discover that Elias will have Leander as a brother is true?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is true in many ways. Leander does not cease to exist just because he's dead.
Right.
Um, he will be part of Elias's life and memory, even though he probably won't consciously remember many of the events of this time. They
Mhm.
have influenced the way in which he's developing.
Mhm.
Um, they'll shape our family experience and the stories that we tell. Um, they influence the way that Jess and I parent. There are lots of residual impacts,
Yeah.
not to mention his name and his other documents and things about him in our home.
So what I'm learning from you is that there is some truth to the contrary thought that Elias will have Leander as a brother. Leander doesn't cease to exist just because he's dead. It'll be part of Elias's life and memory. Um, it shapes, Leander shapes your family experience and all the stories that you tell, and has a big influence on how you and Jess parent. And there's things in the home as well to remind
Mhm.
you and Elias of Leander. So that statement I'm hearing from you is it true at least some of the time.
Yes.
Is there another contrary that's interesting to explore? Usually changing, adding, or subtracting one word. Could be Elias will have some other name as a sibling. Could be, yeah. Does anything come up for you that you'd like to explore?
I think of the reverse, I suppose, of Leander having Elias as a brother,
Yes. That's nice.
which was true for his whole life.
Okay, let's look at Leander will have Elias as a brother. That's a good idea. Tell me one way that's true.
Well, whether he knew it or not, he had Elias as a brother his whole life,
Mm-hmm.
and in whatever state they both continue to exist, I believe that existence will be shared. Somebody just walked by. Well, hello to them.
He's going in the other room.
That's okay.
So Leander will have Elias as a brother. Can you find one more reason we've got that his whole life Elias was his brother? Whatever plane of reality they may each occupy at various points in time, they will always share being brothers. Can you find one more bit of evidence that that is the case?
I mean, just on the legal,
Yeah,
documentation front, if anyone bothers to dig back through ancestry records long after we're all gone, that will still be there.
yeah. So Leander will have Elias as a brother is true. It's true his whole life. It's going to be true for millennia, even when they're both on the other side.
Yep.
And it's legally true. So, of the statements that we've looked at using the peace method, we started with Elias will not have Leander as a brother. We looked at Elias will have Leander as a brother. And we looked at Leander will have Elias as a brother. We flipped it. Are they all true?
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you feeling now on a scale of 1 to 10? Do you feel a little bit lighter? If 10 is happy dance and 1 is I can't get out of bed. How are you feeling at the beginning and how are you doing right now? And then we'll do a recap and the next step in the recap.
I guess I personally don't resonate with that question much, just the I'm okay with quote unquote negative feelings. So my goal is not to just eliminate them, but allow them to have their say and experience them fully. And I, in this moment, don't feel, I'm not aware of any resistance in myself.
Okay.
And so for that, in that sense, I would say 10. 10 in terms of I'm accepting of what is in this moment.
No resistance is good. All right. So, last step of the peace method is E for enthusiasm, which literally means to be filled with God. That's one of my favorite words for that
Hmm.
reason. But you could also think of it
Didn't know
as
that.
engage. Yeah. Like entheoism. Um, so here's what we discovered or what you discovered doing the peace method. Now you can use this tool yourself as a journaling process. We at the beginning we looked at various things that you might want to explore, and we noticed that the thought that Elias will not have Leander as a brother is in the future. So it's like fortune telling or anticipating, not so much really in the right here and right now. Whenever we're in the future, we're going to be disempowered because we're not in the present moment. We then looked at the thoughts and feelings that were associated with this thought, or what does the thought cost you would be another way to kind of think about it. And you notice the catch in your throat, your eyes twitching, various physical sensations. You were hot, your left hand was tingly. You had thoughts of imagining your two boys riding bikes together, and that um, must have felt a little sad because that's not happening. And you also noticed that there's a desire to treat Elias more kindly, desire to fill in the gap. Then we looked at allowing. Would you be willing to just allow the thought without making war on it or making it wrong and bad? And you did that brilliantly. You were able to imagine yourself as maybe a 6-year-old, and you comforted him as he was devastated by this thought. You witnessed it, you were the good listener. And then you even discovered that part of what happens with you with this thought is lovely. A desire to be more nurturing, more gentle, more kind to yourself and to others, to hug yourself, to hug others. Then you can even find something to appreciate about the thought, the truth of it, the clarity of it, that you're willing to say it, acknowledge it. And then we looked at the contrary and we had delightful time finding out that Leander will have Elias as a brother his whole life, which was kind of fun. So, given these 5 different ways of looking at that thought, that grieving thought, what do you choose to do going forward? Or how does this little bit of insight in this half hour of coaching um, provide insight, wisdom, momentum that you can use?
Well, the model itself is memorable. It's easy to recall and put into practice. So that has utility for me, for myself, and potentially for others I might share it with. I engaged with thoughts that I hadn't had exactly in that way before, and I felt some release as a result. So that indicates to me that there was some resistance that I hadn't been aware of before, and now it's not there. So I appreciate that, and I can carry that with me. And it gives me also some sense of how I might explore potential other hidden pockets of resistance using a similar approach and see if I find anything else that I can let go of.
There's usually a long list of things we can all
Uh,
let go of.
there's always something buried in there.
So that's the peace method. It's just those 5 steps, and I think people listening to this can probably, get the gist of it, but if they want a deeper explanation, the book Grief Relief in 30 Minutes explains how to do this, how to use this 5-step process, the peace method, to go from heartbreak to happiness. And I find it a useful tool in my own life. Even if it's not something completely devastating, the mind tends to get locked in one direction, and it's helpful just to have questions to interrupt rumination or interrupt a negative thought and just look at it from another point of view. And I usually find that one of the 5 questions results in an aha.
Mm, mhm. Yeah, well, I personally don't often address the audience per se or people who might listen to these, but I'll take a second here and then, if there's anything else you'd like to share before we close, you can. I I feel a desire to express, 1, gratitude for you for facilitating that, but also I don't record and share myself going through experiences like this just for no reason. I obviously, this is personal and vulnerable, and, um, I I'm willing to put this out into the world on the off chance that someone listening might be able to share in some healing and might get to not feel alone in their own experience of grief or whatever it might be. Um, I know on podcasts are not often mediums or environments in which you get to see people being completely open and vulnerable. People typically have something to sell or offer and a face to put out there, and so um, I I take this opportunity seriously, and I hope that it is helpful for anyone who might listen to this. I
Well,
offer it to you.
I know it will be helpful to people because, as you've experienced, our society doesn't talk about grief. We don't know how to overcome grief. The sad statistics show that most people who experience a devastating loss, as you did or as I did, suffer for 8 to 10 years. And that's just too long. And because you were willing to be so open and take your time and really connect with what were the true answers for you, the listeners will be able to ask themselves similar questions. They'll have a moment to find their answer. Whereas if we'd gone really fast, like if it's just like content, like information, people wouldn't have had the moment to search their own heart and find out what they would answer for their own question that's bothering them. So, I suffered for a long time after my husband died, and I think you and I share the vision of helping other people get through it more quickly and easily. So I acknowledge you for being so authentic.
Thank you. If anyone listening to this would like to ask questions or get similar help or just share your experience, feel free to reach out to me at Collin@superhumanacademy.com. If you'd like to learn more from Aurora, you can do that by...
People can, well, mostly these days I help people write books, write fiction, write nonfiction, create TV series. Oh my goodness, and such not. I have to let Amazon in.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So they can learn more about me at aurorawinter.com, AuroraWinter.com, or Same Page Publishing if they're interested in getting help writing their book. Or best thing is you can just read the book Grief Relief in 30 minutes. If you want to go take a deeper dive, it's on Amazon.
Okay. Thank you.
The Superhuman Academy podcast is hosted by Collin Jewett and designed and edited by Army Cinco, with original music by Joshua Schunig and voiceovers by Corey Page Schunig. That's me. You can find past episodes and resources, as well as access to the ever-growing Superhuman Academy community at superhumanacademy.com. If you like the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice.